because we know that the time between Pesach and Shavuos is the time that there are halachas. During the days of Sfira, there are halachas that we're not allowed to, we don't perform weddings, we don't buy new clothes. I mean, some things, it's not as strict as the 3 weeks, but it's a time of mourning. And the reason why it's a time of mourning, as you'll probably learn in the halacha class, is because Rabbi Akiva had 4,000 students, and actually they were students that were all themselves great Torah scholars. And unfortunately, there was a plague, and the plague spread throughout all the students, and they died. And the Gemara says, why did it happen? Covered because they didn't respect one another properly. That's a discussion in itself. There's no doubt that Rabbi Akiva's students were not violent. They weren't throwing bottles at each other. And obviously it means that according to their standards, according to their level, they did not respect one another properly the way they should. And you'll probably learn a sikha about this, and maybe more than one. But the general question is, how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva, what is he famous for? What? One of the 12 psukim is V'ahavta l'recha k'meicha. Amar Rabbi Akiva zeh klal gadol b'Torah. So this was his theme, this was his teaching, this was what he stood for. And that his Talmidim should not have Ahavas Yisrael. So clearly, they had Ahavas Yisrael. Obviously, it means someone on their level, the way it should have been, there was something lacking. It wasn't the way it's supposed to be. That's the way most people understand it. But even that is not good enough. How could it be that Rabbi Akiva's students, they should have been more than everyone else, and yet we say they were less? Nevertheless, it's according to their level, according to their standards. But the explanation of Chassidus is, actually they had so much Ahavas Yisrael, and that's what led to the fact they didn't have respect for one another. What does that mean? How does that make sense? It means that naturally they're all students of one Rebbe, but still each one had their personality and had their strength and had their way of doing things, their way of understanding things. And even though they had this one Rebbe, but each one perceived things, understood things according to their nature and their personality. To give an example, everyone knows that there are 2 schools of Torah scholars, which the whole Talmud, the whole Gemara, is connected to these schools. Who are they? Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Mm-hmm. So there were 2 great giants of Torah. They were the greatest in the generation. One was Hillel, one was Shammai, and here their students sort of went in different paths. And wherever Shammai said, you're obligated to pay, rather, you're not obligated to pay, Shammai students said, you are obligated. Hillel students said, it's kosher. Shammai students said, it's not kosher. Almost opposite in almost every area. Because Hillel was more connected to Chesed, and Shammai was more connected to Gevurah. But guess what? Who was Hillel's Rebbe? And who was Shammai's Rebbe? The answer is the same people. Their Rebbe was 2 people called Shmaya Vavtalyon. So look, they both received from the same source. They both heard Torah from the same Rebbe, and yet each one took it in their path, and they're both paths of Torah, not Chas v'Sholom, anything wrong, it's just a different way. One is a Chesed person, one is a Gevurah person, so they took it in different directions. With Rabbi Akiva's students, the same thing happened, but each one was so passionate about their path and the way they understood things and the way they relate to things that they had a difficult time to understand and to accept another student who had a different way of looking at things, which is also not the worst thing in the world. So they're passionate about their path. The other students passionate about their path. But they were so passionate about their path that it made them compromise in the Ahavas Yisrael they should have had for the other students. They couldn't respect them the way they should have because they're understanding things not the right way. What does that remind us of? That's what the whole mind was about, Heichaltzu. And Heichaltzu is all about one person not being able to tolerate the other because they're different. And the source of that is because in the spheros, there is the world of Tohu, and in the world of Tohu, the spheros couldn't come together. Chesed was Chesed, Gevurah was Gevurah, and the Gevurah and Chesed couldn't merge. And so how did it play out down here that the people who were Chesed people, then there were those who were Gevurah people, those who were Tiferes people, those who were Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus people, each one was pulling in a different direction, and it led to the fact they didn't have the way it should have been, the proper respect for one another. And therefore, this mimer we're learning in the most appropriate time. And before we start chapter 12, being that it was a break, I'm imagining I probably didn't have too much time to learn the mimer over Pesach and really work on it and study it and review it. So we'll make a little review before we go further. Basically, the mimer says, the mimer is all about what's the clip of Midian. And the explanation of Midian is modern umeriva, which means contention and division between people. And that's the clip of Midian. And he explains that it's not just contention and division, but it's really the source of it is sinas chinam, baseless hate. How can it be baseless hate? So he explains it's mainly rooted into yeshu, gaiva, arrogance. That it's not I hate the other person because they did something to me. We're not talking about that. We're talking about hate that stems from the fact that a person with a yesh, a person who is filled with himself and obsessed with self, and basically self-centered and wants to glorify themselves and wants to enhance their own name and status, they have a hard time recognizing others, and especially others who have qualities and have good qualities. It makes them feel inferior, and therefore they hate them. So it's not they hate them because they're hurting me, they're planning to hurt me, but it's just because of the fact that Yeshus can't stand another person that has any kind of quality. And then for the next few chapters, he went through a number of things which are sort of symptoms and manifestation of Yeshus. So briefly, let's go what he said before. And one thing was, we brought down how beautiful it would be if people would learn together and discuss things together, or a person would discuss things together both academically and discuss things in Avodah together. And what gets in the way, it's usually, again, yeshus, about a person who doesn't really feel the pain of another person, really the way it should be, that when someone else is hurting in any form or shape, I should be hurting. And definitely if somebody else is with simcha, I should be excited with simcha. When a person doesn't feel that pain, or chas v'shalom, even worse, that you're happy to see the other person falling apart, that's yeshus, that's sinas chinam, that comes from this baseless hate. And that was the previous chapter. Then we had brought out how in community there's a lot of disagreement and arguments about Rabbanim and about Sheikh and about all sorts of spiritual things for the community, and everyone who's fighting and arguing thinks that he's fighting because of the spiritual benefit, but in reality it stems from sinas chinam, because otherwise they'll be able to work things out and be able to cooperate one with the other. The last thing he was talking about, which finished on page 88, again, that even when we find that in Yoni Avodah, that people are criticizing others, looking down at others, in fact, even though they have many good qualities, they just look at them with a bad eye and from a negative perspective. They don't want to recognize the good. It's the bad, and that's everything. This is not because they're being sort of true with their judgment. This is all coming as a result of Yeshua. Now we come to chapter 12. chapter 12 and chapter 13, mainly chapter 12, I would say, is a little bit deeper. Once you learn this chapter, you see how the other chapters were a little bit easier. But what he's going to explain now is as follows. One of the biggest traditions, and this is one of the strongest messages to drive home from this minor, is that when he's talking here about these sort of character traits, these flaws, and sinaskinam, and how people don't get along and look at other people in a bad way, he's not talking about people who are simple people, low lives. He's actually talking about people that are oivdim. Oivdim, he means people who work on themselves. Daven, barichot, self-refinement, they learn chassidus, and nevertheless, they can have this kind of flaw, this kind of weakness, this hisarnim. And the reason is because they don't recognize it. It's so subtle that it's easy to convince myself that my motives are holy, my motives are pure, my motives are godly. But in reality, it stems from sinaskinam. Now he's going to give two examples of two people that are davening, and how their davening is the way a chassid is supposed to daven. And nevertheless, in spite of all that, it could be that deep down the motivation is not coming from the purest place, and that could lead to sinaskinam. We're saying the message to us is that even though a person might look at themselves and say, I'm not, that's not me, but we have to be very cautious, because here in the minor he describes people on a level that I think I would wish to be on their level, maybe once a year at least, before Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur. And nevertheless, even these people, he attributes that it's possible that, and they look deep on the surface, that you don't see it, but deep down it could be stemming from midyan. So he's going to explain that in general, there are two kinds of avodah. When people davening, there's two possibilities in their davening. One is people who daven and they're feeling simcha throughout the whole davening. There's excitement and joy, and they're on a high from their davening. And there are people that when they're davening, on the contrary, they're crying, they're feeling broken, they're feeling crushed, they're feeling they want to get closer to Hashem, and how they're lacking, and it leads to them to feeling, not God forbid, depressed, but what we call chassidus merirus, bitterness. Naturally, what would make the difference? The difference is what they're thinking about. What thought, that the emotions are a result of a thought process. If I think about certain things, it makes me happy. If I think about other things, it makes me upset. If I think about other things, it will make me depressed. And if I think about other things, it will make me have merirus. So he's going to explain and give an example of those that daven with simcha, and how that comes from a result of them meditating on Hashem one way. And then he gives another example, another scenario of someone who davens with merirus, and that comes from meditating and focusing on another area, and that makes them feel that way. And after he brings out both forms of davening, he's going to show that both, there could be a possibility that even though they're davening and they're feeling, they're not just davening, they're actually feeling through emotion towards Hashem and good emotion towards Hashem. Nevertheless, they could still have this sort of condition of sinaskinam beneath the surface. So let's start with Yud Beit. V'hinei Asher Yodua, it's known. Asher ba'avodah yeshna beide fani avodah. So when it says avodah, we said many times, avodah means work or labor. In Chassidus, avodah means avodah of refinement, and specifically it's talking about davening, because that's the place. When you learn Chassidus, it's more academic. You're learning, you're understanding, and if you work hard, you're working hard to understand. It's not the time where you work on your personality. You're working on understanding. Davening is the time we work on refining our nefesh bahamis. So there's two ifanim in avodah. Well, I tell the story that there was once two chassidim, the father and the son, both were giants amongst the chassidim. One was the Mechain family, and they both were the perfect sort of example of what he says here. One of them davened with simcha, and the other one, when he davened, he was crying a lot, and he felt more that bitterness. So see what leads to that. The one was standing in one corner of the shul or his house and davening. He used to go to the house because they wanted to daven much longer than the shul and the minyan. There's a lot going on there, and it's disturbing. They went to shul. They heard Kriyas HaTorah. They said Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, everything else. Then they went home and they davened for hours. The one standing on one corner and davening and crying. The other one standing in the other corner, and you have him singing happy songs, and he's all excited. So this other chassid, who was obviously a friend of theirs, walked in and says, "What kind of crazy house is this? What's going on in this house? This guy is crying, and this guy is singing. What's the situation in this house? Is there a reason to cry or to sing?" He was sort of dismissing in their davening. But what he meant to say is, when you walk into a house, if everything is good in the house, everybody is happy. If something's wrong, everybody's sad. How can it be that one person is singing and dancing, the other person is crying? But the real reason was it has nothing to do with the house, it has to do with their davening. This one was davening and thinking about Hashem in one way, and this one was davening and thinking about Hashem in another way. So avoid the besimcha. What does that come from? Hainu, this comes from Kishamaskil Umizbeinin Heita B'Gdilas Hashem. If a person chooses to focus on the greatness of Hashem, that's his focus in davening. And when he sees words in davening, psukim in davening, he thinks about how amazing Hashem is in terms of his greatness. He's infinite, greater than anything we could imagine. And it's not just words, there's a lot of details to think about, as we'll soon see. When you think about the greatness of Hashem, it gets you excited. And that's where the simcha comes from, because you're fortunate that you're connected to Hashem. So now he goes into the detail. He's giving us a sample of what to meditate on, what to think. First of all, to think about the greatness of Hashem, that he created the world yesh me'ayin. If one would focus on the meaning of yesh me'ayin, we would think and realize how great Hashem is. Meshamur Makomach has explained in another place the detail that what? Besides the fact that create yesh from ayin, something out of nothing, in itself is something which is amazing. Why? We humans can't even imagine how that takes place. We have nothing in our human experience that's yesh me'ayin. As explained in other places, which means everything, any kind of creation that we know and we see is called yesh me'yesh, something from something. So if a person goes to a spot where the building is a building that's falling apart and it's inhabited, no one's living there, everything is broken to pieces, and this person is in construction, builds a beautiful mansion, no matter how beautiful it is, but it's not yesh me'ayin. The spot was there before, the foundation was there before, the earth was there before, the wood was there, the nails were there, all the tools he used were there. He just put it all together, but there's nothing here that's something out of nothing. And even when an artist will draw a picture, which is a beautiful picture, a picture that you can stand there and look at it for hours, again, the canvas was there, the brush was there, the paint was there, the idea was there in my head before I drew it. If I'm drawing a landscape, beautiful garden, a beautiful field, whatever it may be, all these things were there before. The picture of it is in my head before, and I'm bringing it out on the paper. It's not yesh me'ayin. In fact, there's nothing in human experience that's yesh me'ayin. There's two things that are the closest to yesh me'ayin, and it's sometimes brought as an example, but it's not an accurate example. The two things are, when things grow out of the ground, is the closest to yesh me'ayin. You put a seed in the ground, looks like this small, and then a few months later, a few years later, you have a tree that's who knows how many feet high, with hundreds of leaves and hundreds of branches and hundreds of twigs, and this all came out of a little thing like this. It's yesh me'ayin. In fact, there's even more of a reason why it's yesh me'ayin. It said that before a seed grows into tree or any kind of plant, once you put it in the ground, it has to sort of decompose and gets absorbed in the soil. And then it grows. So in a sense, it became iron, and then something grows, an apple tree, pear tree, oranges, out of what? Out of nothing. But again, is it really out of nothing? No, there was a seed here before. That seed contained all this potential in it. And through the putting it in the ground, it was processed and grew into a tree. So it's not real yesh me'ayin. The other example is a baby that's born is also the closest thing to yesh me'ayin we can imagine. A human being with intelligence and Baruch Hashem, hands and feet and all the organs in the body, feelings and all the life that there is in a person. And where's it coming from? From almost nothing. But is it really nothing? It's not really nothing. There's something there. There's a certain existence of a cell that develops into a human being. So really we have nothing that we can compare to, and therefore to us, yesh me'ayin, which means something out of nothing. It was absolutely nothing before. To us, it's absolutely amazing. It's mind-boggling. But there's another thing. This is the part that's a little bit harder. We'll try our best to explain it. And that is, there's another point that if you meditate on that, you feel and you understand and you sense even more the greatness of Hashem's creation of yesh me'ayin. You do it, it's known in the Bria, yesh me'ayin, in the Pinas Richu Ka'era. When Hashem creates yesh me'ayin, it's Richu Ha'era. Richu means it's distance. The yesh, which is what was created, is very distant from its source, which created it. What does that mean? So we're going to learn two words here. These are very basic terms of Chassidus, all over my Marim and Sichus. And one is yesh me'ayin, and the other is what you see on the next line, ilu v'olu. Ilu v'olu is usually translated as cause and effect. What's ilu v'olu? Ilu v'olu is anything, thank you, that's not yesh me'ayin. Okay, we need a bracha to get through this piece. That's why I didn't know that you want to put in shotgun. Let's use an example. We just finished saying that the feelings we have are born out of our thoughts. If I think about things a certain way, I'll feel a certain way. If I think about it in a different way, I'll feel differently. So if a person thinks about something that's very frightening, they'll feel an anxiety. They're very worried and concerned that what's going to happen. What made them feel anxiety? Because they were thinking about what could go wrong. The person thinks about the opposite, how amazing this is, how beautiful this is, how good this is. They feel happy, they feel content, they feel very good. So emotion is born out of intellect. And that's one of the first things you learn in Tanya, that the intellect are called parents, and the emotions are called children. And that's the way it is in Kabbalah. That Chokhmah and Bina are called Av V'Ein, and the emotions are called Ben and Bas. The 6 emotions are called the Ben, and Malchus is called Bas. And it's not just a general mushroom. There are many Maimarim that go into the details, which draw a parallel between how a baby is born from father and mother, how amazingly there's a parallel to the way amoebas come out of Chokhmah and Bina. So basically, intellect creates emotion. Is that yesh me'ayin, or that would be yesh me'yesh? Yesh me'yesh. And another word for yesh me'yesh is ilu v'olu. So maybe that'll make it easier to understand. Ilu v'olu is like saying yesh me'yesh. But the difference is, yesh me'yesh is just emphasizing it's something from something. Ilu v'olu means there's a cause and there's an effect. If a teacher, if a Rav teaches the students and teaches them new insight, a new idea, the student never knew this before, and now he knows it. So the teacher brought new wisdom to the student. Is that yesh me'ayin or yesh me'yesh? that Ila v'Olo yesh me'ayin. Right. To the student, it's something new. He never knew it before. But where it come from? It came from a source. It was in the teacher's head. And through speech, he was able to transmit it to the student. So it's not yesh me'ayin. It's something was in the source. And from the source, it came to the same thing with emotion. I want to also emphasize that when we say that emotion comes from intellect, it's not only that the intellect existed before. The emotion already existed in the mind. You might remember, there's also a chapter in Tanya that focuses on this, chapter Telzayim. And that is that before intellect could lead to emotion, you have the emotion in your head. What does that mean? I mean, let's say you want to encourage someone to invest in a business. How do you do that? You explain to them, look, let me show you that this business used to make a profit of $500,000 a year. Who says? How do you know? I'm showing you the books. I'm showing the books and showing the details. And they look at things which is clear evidence, and he understands, wow, this business really brings a profit of $500,000 a year. What's the next stage? The next stage is in my head. My brain tells me I should really go for it. And not only that, after that, I start feeling excited about getting this business. And I want to talk to the person. I want to encourage them to sell me the business because I think I can make a very big profit. So there's 3 stages. One is seichel, when I'm thinking about understanding. The second stage is that this creates emotion in the mind, in the brain, being that this is so profitable, therefore I should want it. Or if a person is going to think about other things, about, let's say, things that they enjoy. This is something that's so tasty, therefore I should want it. The brain tells me that I should be drawn to it because this is going to be a lot of pleasure, this will be a lot of fun, this will be a lot of money, this will be a lot of covered, or people that are looking for power, whatever they're looking for. Basically, there are 3 stages. Stage number 1 is what I understand. Stage number 2 is, therefore, my brain tells me I should feel love or feel fear towards this thing, the way I understand it. The next thing you know, my heart is either pounding with love or fear. That's the order of things. In the language of Chassidus, it's called midas shebeseichel. The midas are still in the brain. And this is one of the similarities to birth, that a baby, yes, the baby is born from the father and the mother, but there's a stage where the baby is part of the mother. And then the baby becomes a separate entity. Here too, the midas are first part of the intellect. And then they become a separate entity where I feel a sensation in the heart. So that means that when I feel a sensation in my heart, it's ilah v'oro. This feeling was already there, but it was there as part of my understanding. Now it's there as a separate entity, but that's its source. It came from the brain. And the same is with the other example, that when the student understands something, whatever the student understands was already in the brain of the teacher, and the teacher is only transmitting it and communicating it to the student, but it already existed. So this is all examples of ilah v'oro. So what he's going to explain now, that even in the case of ilah v'oro, let's look at the word inside and then we'll explain. Zewa Hefresh, I'm reading now page 91. I usually give this introduction to anyone that's online. We're reading page 91 in the Maimer Heichaltzu. We're using the book which is called Lessons in Kuntres Heichaltzu, in Rebbe Rashab. We're continuing from before Pesach. And we're on page 91, the last 2 paragraphs in the bottom. Rather, the 3rd paragraph in the bottom. This is the difference between ilah v'oro, which is yesh mi-yesh, and things that are yesh mi-yayin. Ilah v'oro, in the case of ilah v'oro, hu b'chinas hashpa b'kiruv. The way the source affects the outcome is by being close to it, by connecting to it. Sha'ila mislabish b'oro, the cause is enclosed in the effect. Let's turn the page. La'oru margish esilase. In other words, the way a teacher teaches a student is by how does a teacher teach a student? Is by investing himself into the student, which means he has to think about the student's intellectual capacity, the student's knowledge, what they do know, what they don't know. So I have to explain it this way. So the more the teacher applies himself and connects himself to the student, the better it'll be. In fact, sometimes you have where a teacher could be a brilliant teacher, could be a genius, understands things on the deepest level, but they're lacking the skill to be able to communicate it to the student because they're not really applying themselves to where the student is. And when they explain it, it's almost like to the student, it might be like speaking a different language. They don't know what you're talking about. And you have to speak in a language that student could understand and on a level that the student could understand. That means that the way the source is going to bring about this outcome, which in this case would be the student understanding, is by the source connecting to the student, the teacher connecting to the student. The same is with intellect and emotion. We know that it's possible that some people can think about things intellectually, but it doesn't affect them at all emotionally. In fact, there are people, for example, they study Gemara, they study Chumash, intellectually study even Chassidus, but they don't become changed in any way. And that's because they're not applying it to the emotion, they're just thinking about it in a pure intellectual way. They're disconnected from, they're not even looking to make changes. They just want to understand things, they're just intellectual, and they want to understand things on an intellectual level. If you do that, it's not going to affect you emotionally, generally speaking. The way to affect emotionally means, like it says in Tanya, das, I have to connect to it with the intention that I want what I understand and what I've learned to affect me emotionally, that I should develop love for Hashem, I should develop fear of Hashem, or whatever other emotion it is that we're talking about. Again, if we talk about creation of the art, the only way an artist can create a piece of art is by connecting to it, which means I can't stand there and think the most beautiful images in my head. Nothing's going to happen on the canvas. I have to take a brush, I have to take paint, I have to go next to it and put the paint on the brush and the brush on the canvas, and then I can draw a picture. If a person builds a building, it's again by connecting to it. You have to take a hammer, you have to take all the tools and build. That's yesh me yesh, is always where it brings about a connection between the two things. So by definition, it means that the source and the product that's being produced have some sort of a common ground. There's something that connects them. They're and language is a minor, they're be'erach, one to the other, they're in proportion to one to another. They have a relationship one with another. Versus yesh me'ayin, where in the case of yesh me'ayin is the opposite. The way the ayin creates the yesh is by distancing itself from the yesh, and the more it becomes closer, the less chance there is that the yesh will exist. You gotta explain that. But first of all, everything was okay up until now? Follow me? Let's leave the words inside. On page 92, Masha Ein came, this Havas Yesh Mayim. By contrast, creating Yesh Mayim, bringing something out of nothing, Shes Havas Hu Be'ein Areh. This brings about an existence that is incomparable to its source, the godly source. That means in this case, the influence that brings about the world into existence is distant from the creation. The creator, Mis'alim, has to conceal himself from the creation. He doesn't really clothe himself or invest himself in the creation like the Ela invests itself in the old. So in order to understand this, we'll understand the answer to understanding the way of understanding it by asking another question. What does it mean when you say yesh me ayin? You know, the real word means that something from nothing. What do you mean nothing? Hashem is creating it, calling it ayin. That's my question. It's a question that's asked in many Maimorim. What's the answer? The answer is, yeah, we're referring to Hashem as ayin, which means nothing. How can you say that? Because it means he totally doesn't exist in our realm of reality of existence. We know tables, chairs, things that are tangible, things that you could have 3 dimensions. You can smell it, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can taste it, you can see it, you can hear it. Hashem is a different kind of existence. It doesn't exist in this way at all. So when we say ayin, even though literally it means nothing, but what it means to say it doesn't exist in this way that we understand existence. But to go a step further, when we understand that even the spiritual worlds that are finite, their source is ayin, a place which is infinite, which is a different kind of existence completely. It doesn't exist in the finite kind of existence. So it's called ayin. Even in the spiritual world, so you talk about Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, and from the spiritual world, let's say, comes the creation of this physical world. But I'm saying even in the spiritual world, there's also levels which we call Yesh Me'ayim. We'll explain it in a minute, Hashem, but it means that the higher level is considered infinite compared to the lower level. So the word infinite and finite can also be used in a way that's relative. To give an example, even in our Gashmic world, there's certain things they just don't have the same limitations as things that are physical. For example, there's no way that you can connect 2 tables with each other if there's a wall in between. Impossible. The wall is blocking. But 2 people, to connect emotionally, the wall in between doesn't get in the way. Or for me to understand something that's on the other side of the wall is also not a problem. In other words, things that are not so physical don't have those limitations. So in a sense, we can say something which is not physical and tangible is not as limited as something which is physical and tangible. And that's the way it is with each world. The world of Yetzirah, for example, where we come from, the lowest world, we're a seer. So the world right above us is infinite compared to us. It doesn't have the limitations that this physical world has that are explained in science. All those things don't exist there because it's a different kind of existence. So relatively, the world of Yetzirah is like infinite compared to us. What about the next world, the world of Bria? The world of Bria is so much higher that it's infinite compared to the world of Yetzirah. Doesn't have all the limitations, even that Yetzirah has. And what's Atzilus? Atzilus is infinite compared to the world of Bria. And that's why every world that creates the next world, that creation is also called Yesh Me'ayim. Because Bria doesn't exist in the realm of Atzilus. A realm of Atzilus is a different kind of existence, not just higher. It's a different kind and different category of reality that doesn't exist in the world of Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah. So it's ayin compared to us. We can't comprehend it, we can't conceive it, we can't perceive it. We're to us, it's like non-existent. And that's where the yesh comes from. So, we'll go into this more tomorrow. How it explains that therefore the yesh ayin is these are 2 points that are very not comparable to each other, very distant from each other. Ilaval is the opposite. It works because they're close to each other. Here it works because they're distant from each other. Be continued. Okay. One from Rabbi Marash, the one that everything evolves from the other. What? I think that was the one. Yeah.
Oh.